Oh,
There we go. Okay. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Courtney and Acorn Library, for inviting us to talk. We are Sagamore Native Plant Community. We are a all-volunteer 501c3 nonprofit organization in the southwest and west suburbs of Chicago. Our motto, we're big advocates for native plants, which I'm going to be getting into as the time progresses here. But our motto is restoring our environment one plant at a time. And one thing that I want to say right off the bat, we're not advocating for, there's a lot of organizations or articles you'll read where they're really trying to promote people to take out all their lawn and convert their whole property to native plants. And that's not what we're advocating for, because number one, most people don't want their property to look like a prairie. There's some native plants that really aren't conducive to smaller landscapes. There's some that work great in smaller urban and suburban landscapes, but some don't have the right look. And we want to inspire our neighbors to also plant native, not make them like run and say, oh my God, the crazy person down the street has a prairie in their front yard. So our motto is, plant is, our goal is if everybody could maybe plant a 6x6 pollinator garden, or put a native shrub in that empty back corner of the yard, or if you're going to put a tree in your front yard, make it a native tree as opposed to a non-native tree. So we're not asking for everybody's yard to look like a prairie. We don't want our homes to look like a prairie, but we can do, our motto is that more people doing a little is going to make a bigger difference than a few people doing a lot. And so that's where we get our phrase that we love to go by, our motto, restoring our environment one plant at a time, because even one plant, whether that's one tree, one shrub, even one plant in a pot, can make a big difference to our local ecosystems. Okay, so who we really are. Sagamore, our mission is to advocate for the use of native plants in residential, commercial, and public landscapes. We believe that native plants are the foundation of our food chain and must become more widely utilized to improve the ecosystems that sustain life. And we strive to provide a fun, friendly, and welcoming environment for all who share our commitment to restoring native plants to our community. So we do this by offering in-person and online learning opportunities. We host regular webinars. Our most recent webinar last week was about bumblebees. Our next one coming up in September is going to be about seed collecting and how to collect seeds from your garden. And then we're hoping to follow it up in October with a members meeting where we can exchange seeds so that we can sow seeds this fall and they'll come up in the spring. We also do community outreach within farmers markets and other events to try to get the word out about our organization and about the need to get more native plants into our environment. We assist people in selecting and obtaining native plants. So on our website and on our social media, Facebook, Instagram, we have a lot of information about different types of native plants, what they look like, what their habits are, how they grow, how big they get, what kind of conditions they like, what if they're suited for smaller landscapes. We have a lot of information. So if you're looking to learn more about different native plants that would be good for a suburban yard, check out our social media and our website. There's a ton of information on there. And as far as obtaining native plants, as I said, we're going to be doing our first plant sale in the spring. So I would say around February or March, people will be able to place their orders on our website. And then we'll have a day where you can come and pick up your packet of plants in May. We plan to be doing garden projects, sponsorship, and oversight. So we'd like to actually sponsor some gardens throughout the community and in the various suburbs that we service. We hope as COVID goes away, hopefully, we're going to be offering more just social activities and nature appreciation experiences for both adults and children, things like hikes and picnics and bird watching and different kind of events like that to get out and explore and appreciate nature. So it all comes down to we're really about native plants and being advocates for native plants and increasing the amount of native plants in our environment, because native plants are the foundation of a healthy ecosystem. Now, an ecosystem, let me move my little black box here because I can't read it that well. Okay, so an ecosystem is a geographic area where plants, animals, organisms, and weather interconnect. A native plant is one that has been part of the balance of nature that has developed over hundreds or thousands of years in a particular region. A non-native plant is one that has been introduced with human help, either intentionally or accidentally, to a new place or habitat where not previously found. And one of the things we're trying to do is we try to advocate for native plants and point out the fact that they are not weeds. Some people think native plants are weeds. A weed is simply a plant, native or non-native, that is not valued in the place where it is growing. In fact, most common weeds are non-native plants, plants that have been introduced from Europe or China. We love this quote from Sarah Stein at Ag-Moraine. This is on the homepage of our website. We cannot, in fairness, rail against those who destroy the rainforest or threaten the spotted owl when we have made our own yards uninhabitable. Basically, if we have more native plants in our environment, we're going to have healthier ecosystems. We're going to have an abundant amount of beneficial bugs and pollinators. We'll have abundant birds, a balanced food chain, abundant production of edible fruits and vegetables, improved air quality, reduced carbon, more purified water, less erosion, and a balanced ecosystem with less occurrence of disease. With less native plants, it's just the opposite, and that's the route that we've been on for many decades now, decreasing health of our ecosystems, decreasing number of beneficial insects and pollinators and birds, and our food chain becomes unbalanced, and we have less production of edible fruits and vegetables. Our air quality gets worse. Our carbon goes up in the environment. The quality of our water goes down. We're more soil erosion. Our ecosystem becomes imbalanced with more occurrence of disease. So that's the route we've been on, but we're trying to turn this around. There's many who are trying to turn around this trend. So the first thing I want to talk about in this is our pollinators. And the other thing, we advocate for native plants and trying to show how beautiful they are and how well they can really work in urban and suburban landscapes. So we're trying to give them a little bit of a better PR, but we're also trying to give our pollinators better PR, because bees have gotten kind of a bad name over the years because people don't want to get stung. People are allergic to bees. They think of them as being aggressive. The truth is that bees are very peaceful. Most of our native bees are solitary. They don't sting. They don't even have stingers. So we really want it's the yellow jackets that have given our bees a bad name, and we're trying to help their PR out a little bit too, because we need our pollinators, and our pollinators need native plants. More than 150 food crops in the US depend on pollination. And pollination is key to the production of oxygen. So if we don't have pollinators, we're not going to have enough oxygen to breathe. Pollinated plants sequester carbon. Pollinated plants help to purify water and prevent erosion. And pollinated plants return moisture to the atmosphere, which creates our weather. Our pollinators include butterflies, moths, flies, beetles, bees, and birds. However, bees are by far our most efficient pollinators. Two types of bees that we see when we go out into our landscapes. Honeybees, these are non-native bees. They came from Europe. They require unnaturalized industrial bee farming. So basically, because our farming has become monoculture, huge, massive farms of soybean and corn, we don't have any plants around to, which I'll get around to in a minute, but where our native pollinators can reproduce and feed. So in order to pollinate these crops, because in our farmlands, we've killed off all of our native pollinators, we have to travel around with these big hives of honeybees that were originally imported from Europe in order to do our pollination. And that has been encumbered with a lot of problems. It's susceptible to colony collapse disorder, which was a huge problem a few years ago. It's improved some, but we're always kind of teetering on the edge using this unusual, this unnatural form of pollination for something that is as critical as our food supply. Honeybees live in more aggressive colonies, these huge hives, and they also compete with our native bees for food. We're not saying that, you know, we need these honeybees now. We do. We won't have enough food without them because we've killed off all of the native bees in our farmlands. But we really don't want to have a lot of honeybee hives in our suburbs, in our cities, in our other natural lands, because they compete with our native bees. And we're really trying to bring back some of our native bees, who are many species of which are on the road to extinction. Whoop, didn't mean to do that yet. Let me go back. A little bit about our native bees. As I said before, almost all native bee species are solitary. They're peaceful and rarely sting. Many don't even have stingers. However, native bees, they need native plants to reproduce. Native bees can feed off of many different types of flowering plants, but most of them are what's called a specialist bee. They can only reproduce or feed their young certain nectar from certain plants, and those plants are, of course, native plants. Habitat loss has caused the Midwest to lose half of its native bees within this century. That is just huge. Our native bee numbers are declining rapidly, and it's so disheartening. Native bees are at least 3 times more effective at pollination than honeybees. But because we've killed them, so many of them off, because of lack of the native plants they need, we're so reliant on aggressive European honeybees. And just to show you how peaceful our native bees are, this is a mason bee. Mason bees are around in the spring. So they come out early. You'll start seeing mason bees in April. They pollinate a lot of our spring crops and flowers, and they don't have stingers, and they are as peaceful as they come. There's one on my finger, a cute, sweet little guy, not going to cause a problem. And this is one mason bee can do the pollination of 200 honeybees. So that's how efficient they are. Here's some of the crops that we get thanks to bees pollination. It would be pretty depressing thinking of a world without these tasty and nutritious foods. Not to mention all the plants that sequester carbon and produce oxygen and so on that we rely on bee pollination for. Now, some of our other pollinators and insects in general. The world's insect population is plummeting. Many of you may have read some articles about that in recent years. It's estimated that we have lost 30% of our insects in the past 3 decades. Now, some people probably think, oh, that's great. Insects are icky and they're crawly and they bite and they ruin our picnics. But really, insects are the base of our food chain. Without them, everything else will start to crumble. And these insects need native plants to breed and feed. Our food chain depends on these insects. The monarch butterfly, which we have pictured here, has become kind of a poster child for what's going on in the insect world. Monarch butterfly populations have decreased by 93% in the last few decades. The 2 main reasons for this are pesticides and habitat loss, because they can only rear their young, lay their eggs on milkweed. As we've taken milkweed over the decades out of our landscapes and replaced it with parking lots and strip malls and subdivisions with imported plants from Europe, we have taken most of the milkweed out of our environment, and that's why these guys are going extinct, and they will go extinct within the next 10 years without a lot of effort to try to get more milkweed into our landscapes. But this kind of thing, because of their amazing migration, these guys get a lot of attention. They're an amazing creature, but this is going on throughout our insect population. They don't have the plants that they need to rear their young. And so many species of butterflies and moths and other very beneficial insects, their numbers are declining very rapidly. Here's just some pictures to try to remember. I remember when I was a kid, tons of lightning bugs in the yard. I remember seeing caterpillars crawl across the sidewalk. I never see that anymore. I remember seeing moths hovering around street lights. Very few if you walk by a street light now. I remember if you used to drive at night many years ago, your whole windshield would be splattered with bugs. Now, maybe you get one or two, but nothing like it used to be. I remember seeing our native ladybugs all over the place. Now it's like a great treat if you catch a glimpse of one. Even our little roly-poly bugs that are working hard for us below the soil, chewing up and getting rid of organic matter to help fertilize our soil and keep our environment clean. Even those are much harder to see. What is causing, what many people refer to what's going on as the insect apocalypse, and what is causing that? Lawn chemicals and pesticide use is a big culprit. Habitat loss and yards that look like this, that have that don't offer anything for our native species to use, to feed on, to reproduce on, and introduced invasive plants such as this Kellery pear tree. And I mean, I was guilty of planting these back in the day too, when they were so popular, and everybody thought that they were a beautiful tree, that the bugs didn't bother, they didn't get disease. Well, the bugs didn't bother them, that's true, because they are imported from China and none of our bugs can use them, none of our insects can use them at all. So, and what makes it worse, they're invasive and they're starting to take over all of our, they're going from our backyards and our suburbs and they're being carried by birds and squirrels to our natural lands and our forests, and they're starting to take over and invade those areas and suffocating the native species. So they're on the big time invasive species list. I love this quote by Jonas Salk: "If all insects on Earth disappeared within 50 years, all life on Earth would end. If all human beings disappeared from Earth within 50 years, all forms of life would flourish." Again, insects, they're not just these creepy crawly things. All life depends on them. They're the base of our food chain, and we would not exist without insects. So the stories of their numbers plummeting is really, I mean, it's beyond distressing. But that doesn't mean we can't do something about it. Insects is the next thing we want to talk about is birds. So the next step up the food chain is birds, and birds are, I mean, they're cute and they're cheerful and we love to hear them sing. But boy, birds they're doing amazing things to keep our ecosystems going and to keep our environments clean and healthy. And we need them badly. They keep destructive agriculture insects in check. You know, when we hear about like a big, you know, invasion of some kind of an insect from usually from Europe or China that's affecting our crops, Well, we don't have enough birds out in those areas, otherwise they would be kept in check. They help with the pollination of flowering plants. They help prevent the prevention of disease through waste removal. They help spread the seeds and restore our ecosystems. These guys are our planters. They're the ones that plant our prairies and our forests and our savannas and our wetlands. And they help to store carbon and keep the climate stable by sustaining natural landscapes. We absolutely need birds, and the birds need insects, and it comes down to the insects need native plants. Birds absolutely need insects, and one of the most important insects to birds are caterpillars. Caterpillars from butterflies and moths. They need these to raise their young. Caterpillars are the most nutritious, and they're the most important food source for nestling birds. According to Doug Tallamy, and I don't know if you have any of Doug Tallamy's books in the library, but I would highly recommend, if anybody wants to look more into this after our talk today, a couple great books by Doug Tallamy. He's an entomologist from the University of Delaware. His books, Bringing Nature Home and Nature's Best Hope, are just amazing if you want to look more into this subject. And we're actually going to be having him at a guest webinar with him next February. We have him scheduled. So he's just an amazing author and speaker. But according to Doug Tallamy, it takes 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to raise one clutch of young chickadees. Think of how many caterpillars it is just to raise one nestful. And when you remember that caterpillars, whether they be of some variety of butterfly or some variety of moth, they can only be raised on the plants that they co-evolved with over hundreds and thousands of years, native plants. Any plants that come over here that are introduced cannot be a host for caterpillars. So the more introduced plants we have, the less native plants we have, the less caterpillars can grow, the less our birds can feed their young and reproduce, and the problem just cascades. Native plants are certainly the foundation of our food chain. And here you can see that native plants, the way they service the birds and the insects service the birds, and the insects service and pollinate our crops, and the birds pollinate our crops. And we eat the crops, and our livestock eats the crops, and that all feeds humans. And on the end, we have native plants that feed our herbivores, and birds that plant the seeds of plants that feed our herbivores, and birds are eaten by carnivores, and carnivores are eating the herbivores. So it all is like, it all comes back down to, at the root, no pun intended, is native plants. So we talk about these depressing things, our pollinators numbers decreasing, our beneficial insect numbers decreasing, our birds decreasing. We're in Armageddon, oh my gosh, but what can we do? Is there anything that we can do to turn this around? And the answer is absolutely yes. We can plant native plants. And again, we're not talking about turning our yards into a prairie. We're talking about putting some beautiful, well-behaved native plants into our landscapes. It's going to make our landscapes more beautiful. It's going to eventually, as you know, after they're established, make it easier to maintain. And it's going to service our birds, our bees, and our butterflies and moths. Native plants are beautiful. They're essential to our ecosystem. They're easy to care for. They require less water. They're designed for our climate, and they're adapted to our soil. So here's just some examples of, you know, some beautiful native plants. We have bee balm and aster and sunflower, and you know, and so the key is to have different, you know, a multitude of different plants that are blooming in different seasons, so that our pollinators have food throughout the seasons. Here's some of our native grasses. Here's a shade ground cover, another good shade ground cover. Here's some of our shrubs. New Jersey tea, that's a beautiful shrub, gets to be like 3 feet tall by 2 feet wide, full with white flowers. Pollinators just love it. Our 9-bark is a lovely shrub.
Oh, got that one.
The willows, when we talk about willow, we're not talking about those big weeping willow trees. Those are actually from China, but some of our beautiful willow shrubs like prairie willow or pussy willow, those are really important to our pollinators because they're the first things to bloom in the spring. So they can be life-saving for our early emerging pollinators. And a few more, some of our trees, oak and birch and serviceberry and red maple and plum and our winterberry and the eastern redbud. I mean, when you look at these gorgeous native plants, you can see that native plants are certainly not weeds. And then the other thing we want to do to help turn this around is to include some keystone plant species in our landscapes. Every ecosystem has certain species that are critical to the survival of the other species in the system. Without them, the ecosystem may not survive. So there's a few species in our area that are keystone, that are the ones that pack the greatest punch in our ecosystem health. And those are oak. Oak is number one. Oak actually is the host plant for over 500 species of butterfly and moth caterpillars. Plum cherry is not far behind. Willow, birch, red maple, goldenrod, which by the way is not the cause of hay fever. I forget what the weed is that is the cause of hay fever, but it's some non-native weed. Sunflower, wild strawberry plant, false indigo or lead plant, and Joe Pye are the keystone species in our area. And even if you don't have, whether somebody has 10 acres or they have a 10-foot patio, it all makes a difference. Again, every plant we plant makes a difference in our ecosystem. So if you don't have a lot of space and you live in an apartment or a condo and you have a patio or balcony, you can still, there's a lot of native plants that do very well in pots. To make an attractive pot that services our ecosystem, it's good to incorporate 3 types of plants. We have thrillers, which are taller focal points. Some examples of good thrillers are blue hyssop, oxeye sunflower, anise-scented goldenrod, zigzag goldenrod, and obedient plant. Then we have spillers. These are ones that vine and trail over the side. Some good native spillers would be purple poppy mallow and the wild strawberry. And then we have fillers, which are mid-size and mounded that fill in the middle, and some good plants to use for that would be purple coneflower, butterfly weed, landsleaf coreopsis, foxglove, wild petunia, sky blue aster, and prairie dropseed. And then I also want to mention a few very beneficial non-native annuals. Our native plants often that, they're perennials, so they'll bloom and then they stop and then they bloom. And there's some periods of time throughout the summer where there's a little bit of lack in between blooms. And so planting some pots with some of these non-native species can be very beneficial because it would give our bees and our butterflies a constant source of good pollen and nectar. So the ones, I can tell you that, I've seen a number of monarchs in my yard this year because I put in a lot of milkweed. So I've been drawing more monarchs, and they are always on my lantana and on my zinnia. They just are crazy about lantana and zinnia. Also, other good ones for our pollinators are cosmos and alyssum. So adding some pots of those would be is a great boon to our pollinators as well. And now some other ways that we can create a pollinator-friendly habitat in our landscapes are choose native plants that provide pollen and nectar, include some butterfly and moth host plants, minimize hybrid, and try to stick with native, with true species native, stay away from hybrid cultivars. And you'll tell that it's a cultivar by it'll say, like, let's say you're looking at blue hyssop. Then it'll have another word in quotations. If it has another word in quotations, that means it's a cultivar of the native blue hyssop. And it has been found that they are less beneficial to our native insect species and pollinator species than the straight species would be. We want to plant in clusters rather than single specimens to help our pollinators find the plants. We want to reduce the size of our lawn. Lawn provides no benefit to our ecosystem. Not to say we don't want any lawn. If you have kids, if you have pets, if you just like the look of some lawn, we're not saying get rid of the whole lawn. But if we could make it a little bit smaller and put in some native plants, a native shrub, a pollinator garden, every little bit, every square foot helps. Choose a variety of spring, summer, and fall blooming plants to provide pollinator food throughout the seasons. Avoid the use of herbicides and pesticides whenever possible. Also, and this was one that I was really shocked by when I first heard this. I had never thought of it because I used to use mulch, but we should avoid using landscape fabric, rock, or thick mulch. When possible, use native ground covers, native plant ground covers to prevent weeds. Or another good option is to get leaf mulch. And what amazes me is we can have this beautiful oak tree that is servicing 500 species of caterpillars, but if there is really thick mulch under that or hard lawn under that, a lot of those caterpillars fall to the ground and finish their metamorphosis underground and then emerge from the ground as a moth or butterfly. So if they can't penetrate something like thick mulch or rock or landscape fabric, they're not going to be able to finish their metamorphosis. And we want to let fallen leaves remain in the garden beds until spring. Many pollinators and lightning bugs and many other beneficial insects, they overwinter in leaf litter. So if we blow and destroy all those leaves away, we're removing all the larvae of those beneficial insects. That's why our lightning bug numbers are down so far. So if you remove it from your lawn, maybe put some of it in your planting beds and then leave it there. And I've been doing that for the last 3-4 years. And by the time spring comes, there's no leaves left. I mean, they break down and they fertilize the soil and they leave then the larvae there on the ground for the spring warmth to start their development. Try to wait until after Mother's Day for your first lawn mow to help spring foraging pollinators and emerging insects. Wait until spring to do a yard cleanup. Many of our native bees overwinter in old stems. If you're going to cut them back to leave them about 18 inches high, because that's usually where they will burrow, lower in the stem. Help reduce light pollution that harms our birds and insects. Do this by using motion sensor, yellow or soft white LED lights outdoors that shine downward. And finally, become a follower of SAG Marine. Consider making a donation, consider becoming a member or a volunteer. The more volunteers we have, the more we can do. We're trying to get the word out. We're trying to help get more native plants in the ground. Also follow us on our Facebook and Instagram and look for our plant sale, attend some of our webinars and other activities and informational things that we do to learn more. And reach out to us if you have any questions. You can reach out to us through our website. So if you're thinking of putting some native plants on your property and you want more information, please feel free to contact us through the website, and we will get back to you and try to help you in any way we can. So with that, I would love, how long did I blab? Okay, 7:38. I would love to answer any questions if anybody has any, or Peggy, if you wanted to add anything to my talk. Was there any points that I missed?
Of course, Lulu was barking right at that time.
Of course, but Lulu's cute, so she can get away with it.
Okay, so I'll get on my video too. one of the, you mentioned about the pollen, the big pollen generator is ragweed. It's
Ragweed, yes.
a billion pieces of pollen in one plant. So it's not really other native plants. I mean, they have pollen too, but not like for hay fever, that's ragweed.
Right.
And the only other comment I had was the example of when you talk about cultivars, and cultivars are always have, as you said, the quotes around it. It might say native plant, and then if there's a quotation marks around, oh, big blue or something, end quote, then we know it's a cultivar. And an example is, I love Annabelle hydrangeas, and just planted a lot of them and did not know that they were not really native until I planted a native hydrangea, and then looked at the difference in what occurred with the pollinators versus Annabelle hydrangea, which is a beautiful plant, and a native hydrangea, which is also a beautiful plant. Buzzing, pollination, butterflies, bees, little sweat bees, everything just hovering around the native plant, and nothing on the Annabelle hydrangeas. So just a pretty clear example of the differences between a native plant and a plant that has been manipulated.
I'm looking for a picture of the native hydrangea.
Smooth
They're beautiful.
hydrangea.
The smooth hydrangea, there we go. Oops. So there is a native species of hydrangea, and it's not the Annabelle, and it is amazing when it's called smooth hydrangea. And it is amazing when you look at it. I was in Peggy's yard and she had the non-native species and there was nothing going on. And then next to it, she had the native species and there was just tons of life. And I can say that since I've been planting native plants, or doing, incorporating native plants in my landscape for probably the last 4 to 5 years. And I mean, I've always been a gardener. I was a lifelong gardener, and I thought I was planting for butterflies and birds and, but I wasn't paying attention to whether, I just was paying attention to whether plants bloomed and butterflies liked to eat off of them. I was not paying any attention to whether my plants were native. And when I became aware of this, and I read some books by Doug Tallamy, and I started adding more native plants, and I had seen, even as a gardener over a couple of decades, how there was less and less life in the yard. And then after a few years of having native plants in, I'm actually starting to see life. I'm seeing ecosystems start again. I'm seeing things that I had never seen before, different types of bees, different types of butterflies. It's really amazing when it really is. If you plant it, they will come. And I know you've experienced that too, Peg. I guess Lulu's barking again.
Yes, I have experienced it. And as I said, it used to be a garden, was a beautiful picture, but not alive. So it's so active and beautiful, and the sounds of nature, the rushing around of beautiful butterflies and critters, and there's movement. So it's not just a beautiful flat picture, it's a moving, living organism. So I'm going on mute again because of mouth lady in the background.
Does anybody else have any questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
How do you know? Because like I bought strawberries to plant. How do I know if it's wild strawberries or regular? Just look to see if there's anything after it in parentheses.
Yes. So like I always like to, when we have let me find it here, when we list on the website, whenever I'm writing for social media or putting something on the website, I always list the Latin name. So you're going to look for it. It's going to be strawberry plant Fragaria is the Latin name.
Oh,
But then if it had a name in quotes after it, that means it would be a cultivar. So you wanted to say the common name and the Latin name, but the Latin name will never be in quotations. Anything in quotations means it's a cultivar.
Oh, okay. And that would be the same for like petunias. I mean,
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah,
So-
they always put the cultivar name, if they say, some kind of a petunia, and they'll call it, and I don't even remember the Latin name of petunia, but they'll say petunia, they may have the Latin name in parentheses, and then they may say skyrocket or whatever, and that would be in quotations.
Okay, and if they have both the Latin name and the quotations, then you know that it's still wrong, right?
Correct. It should only have it should only have
Okay.
the common name, the Latin name in parentheses, and that would be it.
Okay, and I was like so excited. I went, oh, I have 3 different nine barks in my yard, but I don't know if they're the native nine barks. I just know I like them.
I
And-
love, they're wonderful. Let me find them on here. So the way you can tell if it's the native 9-bark is if it has, where is the picture of the 9-bark here? I know I just saw you. Here we are.
Oh, yeah,
So the
right.
native 9-barks have green foliage. The non-native ones have like a purple foliage.
Okay, and I think I have one of each because I know I have one that's red and then I have one that's green. I don't remember what the third one is. Okay, so the green one would be the only native one.
Correct. And
Okay.
and again, we're not saying, because you probably, even with the non-native, because I used to have a non-native 9-bark. Now I have a native 9-bark that I just put it in this year, actually. But I used to have a non-native one. Now, the bees I still got bees and butterflies on it, not to the same extent, but I did still get them. So it's certainly like a more beneficial, a non-native would probably be more beneficial than putting in a burning bush, which doesn't do anything for anybody. But it's not going to be as beneficial as the native, and it's not going to host any species of caterpillars because it's not the native species.
Oh, okay, so there would be maybe caterpillars on the 9-bark, maybe?
Yeah, the 9-bark is a host plant too.
Okay, because I had never looked that close. My husband is the gardener and he doesn't like me to interfere. And he's allergic to bees. So he's very against doing anything native-y that might bring a bee. So this is going to be a big problem to change him over. But like, see, he didn't know about the 9-bark and he didn't know about these other ones. And
The unfortunate thing is the native bees. So most bee stings are actually yellow jacket wasps. But that being said, if it's going to be an actual bee sting from a bee, it's usually the European honeybees.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously the people behind us used to raise them, and then we had him in a bush and he was cutting down the bush, and that's how I got stung by 40 or 50 bees. But that was
Okay.
like 10 years ago, but he's still worried and I don't blame him. He still has
Mhm.
his EpiPen with him all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be kind of hard to try to encourage him to do this, but he did let me plant the little milkweed in the backyard. So I did get a start.
Okay, wonderful. And maybe like you're going for more plants that host some of our butterflies and host some of our moths and maybe aren't as much of a bee plant. Like, to give you an idea, our butterflies tend to like plants that they can actually land on, that have like circular flowers like this or spread out, as opposed to if you have plants that have more stalk-like flowers, and let me find one here, like like this, bees would be more attracted to this. Bees would be more attracted to, like, for example, blue hyssop. I love blue hyssop. It's one of my favorite plants in the garden because so many bees love blue hyssop. It's just always loaded with bees. But I don't see a lot of butterflies on it because it's elongated and they can't get on there as well.
Yeah.
Same thing with this. Like, if you go with the foxglove, the butterflies can't get on there. So if you go with, but yet I've noticed that some of these very ones that the butterflies aren't on as much, the bees seem to like more. So maybe if you go with more of the good butterfly plants, like I see butterflies on my, milkweed like this all the time. I see a lot of butterflies on my
Coneflowers, we had coneflowers too,
coneflowers.
so that's good. I have a
And I
question.
don't see a lot of bees on them. Not that they're never going to be on there, but they're
Right,
never, they
yeah.
don't seem to be the favorites.
Favorite, yeah. I just planted, like, actually it was just 2 weeks ago. I bought some sunflower, yes, what do you call them? Yeah, sunflowers. And I went out today, some animal like chewed them. They're both gone. The one is knocked over and the other one, it looked like it was cut. So I don't know what animal has such great teeth, but there's not a single teeny little leaf or flower petal left. So what animals like sunflowers?
I'm guessing it must be rabbits.
Well, that's the only one I could think of, but how could a rabbit? I mean, these sunflowers were like, 8 inches tall. I mean, they were big, the ones I bought. And the stalk is still there, but the flower is gone. It looked like they just chewed it.
Wait, how tall how tall were the stalks?
It was about 6 inches.
Oh, a rabbit will get that. I had the purple rose mallow right here, the hibiscus there on that second row. And I walked out one day and they were all flat, everything eaten. And I know it had to be rabbits
But
because,
it's funny because I haven't seen a darn
and they were
rabbit this whole
taller than
year.
8 inches. I'm sorry.
I said I haven't seen a rabbit this whole year. So it's like, that's why I'm like,
I haven't either, but I think, I don't know what else it would be.
Well, I mean, like you can get now, had they come to seed yet?
no. And that's what I
Okay.
was so irritated about. There weren't any seeds left so that I could try to replant them.
So, but so were there seeds on them when they disappeared, but they just hadn't
I
like
don't
come
think so.
off
It
yet?
didn't look like it yet. No, because I was kind of waiting because I was going to make sure that I, plucked the seeds and saved them.
Okay, because I mean, if a rodent or squirrel would take it if there were seeds. It could have been a squirrel too. I mean, it
Yeah, I've
could have
got a
been
lot of
squirrel.
squirrels that climb on the fence. Yes, we have lots of those. Lots.
Yeah, they go after my sunflowers sometimes. Sometimes I think they're looking because they love those sunflower seeds, and sometimes I think they're looking. But I actually now that you're talking about this, I have a picture of a squirrel on my wall from last year that stole a whole sunflower of mine, took it off the stalk and took it out of the yard.
Oh,
And I don't even know if it had formed seeds yet, but it equated sunflowers with good tasting seeds, and it had decided it wanted to take it. I don't know if it realized that they hadn't formed yet.
well, and that makes sense because I saw the squirrel take one of my cherry tomatoes and then he spit it out. So he's a stupid squirrel. He doesn't really know what he's doing yet,
He's a learning disabled
I'm like, I
squirrel.
don't
He's
think
like, I
squirrels
haven't
like
learned this
tomatoes.
stuff yet.
Why
Maybe
eating
he's
that?
young.
No, but this
Good.
was just so darn much information that I'm going crazy. I'm trying to take notes. So like, if I go onto your website, it'll be all there. I mean, I think I'm going to have to sign up here.
Yes, we have a ton of information on the website about good native plants for traditional landscapes. Also, and when I say good native plants for traditional landscapes, that's one of the main things that we really wanted to contribute to the whole native plant movement. Is not all native plants are equal when it comes to urban and suburban landscapes. None of us have, well, maybe you do, but I sure don't have 10 acres that wild look actually looks fine. If you live in some suburb up north or far west where people are on multiple acres and there's horses and then when you have wild areas, it actually kind of blends in and it looks normal. On my street, where unfortunately most people have white flags for chemicals on their lawn and super neat lawns and perfect lawns, and if I did something like that, nobody's gonna say, oh my gosh, I want my lawn to look like Kathy's. They're gonna be like, oh, there's Nutbag down there with the prairie in her front yard. So I need to keep it I want it to be native, but I want it to be neat native so that people actually say, oh, native plants really are beautiful. So we really wanted to get information out there about not just planting native, but what native plants work good in smaller landscapes in cities and suburbs. Because actually when a lot of our species of bees and butterflies and moths that are declining, the last hope for these species is starting to be suburbs and cities, believe it or not, because the worst area for the saving of these creatures is farmland and the country. So we always think that out there where there's not a lot of houses and not a lot of people living is going to be a better place, but actually that's where all of our farmland is. That's where we just have a bunch of corn and soybean and tons of chemical fertilizers, and our native bee and insect population has been decimated out there. So the last hope for a lot of these creatures is in our cities and suburbs.
Yeah, and I like what you said about having just a little bit more into your yards. I'm going to try to do that. Just have a little bit, cut a little bit more the lawn out and make it a little bit bigger. Put a bush there or something, or a shrub or something.
Right.
So I'll have to try to do that. Yeah.
Right. We have to think of, and we have to think of small. Every plant helps.
Hey, is prairie grass any good? Because we got prairie grass all over, because we were trying to cover the fence so that we didn't see our neighbors. We got lots of different prairie grass. Is that any good?
It would depend on what species. There's a lot of prairie grasses that are invasive that are actually not native species. So I would have to know what type of grass it is.
Yeah, and we have so many different kinds that have died, and then we just bought new. And then, I wasn't paying attention. I just said, oh yeah, good. I like prairie grass because it covers up the fence, So
These
yeah,
are some of my favorite species of our native grasses. There's little blue stem and big blue stem, great color. Prairie dropseed, I put some of this out in front. It's just
ooh, I
it's
like
just
that.
amazing. And since I put that out there, I have all these cute little blue damsel flies that look like little miniature dragonflies that are always landing on it. It's so cute. It has a nice smell too. And this switchgrass is really attractive too. So these are some of the most attractive, again, best behaved native grasses that aren't going to take over smaller areas.
Yeah, no, that looks nice. Okay. You were talking about mulch, get rid of your mulch, and you said heavy leaf mulch. You mean just take the leaves that you rake up and you throw away, put those down as the mulch?
Peggy is our resident expert on leaf mulch. So if Lulu will let her, I'd like her to tell you about leaf mulch and where
I don't
she
mind
gets
hearing
it.
Lulu in the background.
Okay, all right. Now she laid down for a minute, so we'll see. I kind of discovered leaf mulch and read about it, and it's a little bit difficult to find. But in the fall, we're going to find it more. So it's not like the big chunks of mulch. It's not even like shredded mulch. It is the most wonderful stuff. It is actually ground up leaves. And we can
But it
all
doesn't
do.
look like you just left a lot of leaves lay on your.
No, it looks like a mulch. It looks like
Oh,
a very fine mulch, wood mulch.
It's
But
very
it is,
dark. It's almost the color
yeah,
of soil. It's not like a
right.
light, like looking like a bunch of dried leaves.
Right. It's not like dried leaves. It's not like a cedar. It's a deep brown color and it's beautiful and it's soft and it will pack down because of when you have rain and stuff, but it does not get as packed as or moves. You would think that this stuff would blow away. It doesn't. It doesn't blow away. It's in the garden. It's beautiful. It's very neat looking and I'm doggone it. I'm trying to remember where I got it. And you have to look online and it will have leaf mulch and but it's only there. And then what I'm gonna do this year too
Where
is
was it? You got it at a place in Homer Glen, right?
Homer Glen. Yeah, Homer Glen mulch. Yeah, Homer Glen.
okay.
So and just look online for Homer Glen. I think it's mulch or Homer Glen trees and mulch. They also come out and look at your trees, trim trees, cut down trees, but they have mulches there. So they will have more in the fall as they gather leaves and people dump leaves and they'll mulch them up. But you can also do that once you put like a base. I'm just going to rake all my leaves into the beds and then they will disintegrate. And some people do get a mulcher. We have a friend of ours who has a pretty good sized piece of property and she mulches everybody's leaves in the neighborhood and throws it in her beds. So those are just a couple ideas, but start looking if you want to do the mulching now. I think when I did it, I think it was in June, they only had like 17 yards left, and I took 11 of them. So that was in the spring though, and it was after the fact. Now up north, they have a lot of those places, but nobody's going to deliver to us. So it's Homer Glen is
Yeah,
where you
okay.
should go.
And I have to say that I had my landscaping in the front. It was a long time coming. I had it redone this summer, this spring and summer. And I took out a bunch of old overgrown boxwoods, an old non-native plum tree that was all woody and on its way out, and burning bushes and just old big shrubs from like the 80s. And yeah, probably the 80s, early 90s. So it was just very heavy and it needed a real facelift. So I had somebody come and take out all of my rock. I had, oh my gosh, like 7,000 pounds of river rock in there. So he took that out. The poor guy, I can't believe he can still move. So he took out all that like worthless rock, and I did the whole thing in natives, but I didn't change the footprint. I kept the same landscape footprint and put native shrubs in there and some other native flowering plants, because I'm leaving some lawn, because I want this to look like a normal landscape with native plants, so that my neighbors will think, wow, maybe I could add some of that, that I do like that. That's beautiful. And they already are saying that, which is, and it's in, but he put leaf mulch over it. He did not, he used leaf mulch. And I am telling you, I have never seen, this is not usually normal. You always hear the saying that when you plant plants, the first year they sleep, the second year they creep, and the third year they leap. Well, this was a dead environment out there with landscape fabric and rock and old worthless non-native old shrubs and woody, and there was no life out there. And he did this and he put leaf mulch there. There couldn't have been one nutrient in that soil out there, but that leaf mulch, I swear these plants have all doubled in size in 2 months. I can't believe it. The only thing I can think of is it must be that the nutrients from that leaf mulch.
Now, because last year was the first year my husband put mulch everywhere. Before it was just black dirt, but he decided he wanted mulch. So we'd have to get rid of the other mulch and then put the leaf mulch on top of it. I
It
mean,
depends. How much do you have out there? Because mulch usually does disintegrate like in a year or two.
Do you
yeah,
have landscape fabric, Jackie? Jackie, did he put the landscape
no,
fabric down?
don't have any fabric.
Oh,
Then I
that
would
be
say
good.
just put the leaf mulch on top, because
top.
that regular mulch, that disintegrates, that'll be gone.
Yeah, okay, because I'm thinking of trying to start it in a little small area that I'll tell my husband is mine, and then if he likes it, then we can do it for the rest of the lawn. I'm gonna try to be nice and, slowly
Right.
break him
Yeah.
into this.
Yeah, the mulch will deteriorate. And yeah, the other thing when Kathy was talking about just the benefits of the leaf mulch and the nutrients, remember wildfire something. Native plants don't need to be fertilized and they don't need as much water once they're established. So after the first year or two, you don't have to be as worried as we are about like in a drought this season, like we have this year of going out every night and watering the flowers and that. So there's some real benefits to the economy of no fertilizer and not excessive watering.
They say that native plants, they really they don't want fertilizer. They evolved with our soil, as crappy as our soil is, clay and everything. That's what was here. And so they don't want a lot of unnatural fertilizer, just the natural decay of the leaves and what's around them. And they're as happy as a clam.
Yeah. Okay, good. I got lots of things to think about. And is this program going to be so I can show my husband? Is it taped from the library here?
You did tape it, right, Courtney?
Yes, I did record it and I'll be posting it tomorrow and sending out the links.
Okay, good. Then I'll try to talk. I couldn't talk him into watching it tonight, but maybe if I sound excited, maybe he'll watch it with me tomorrow.
Tell them they're very reasonable and they're only telling us to do a little bit. They're not telling us to do everything.
Yeah, I should start like that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us, Jackie.
Oh, it was wonderful. Thank you.
Wonderful. And thank you, Courtney, for inviting us.
Thank you for presenting. It was great.
Wonderful. Okay,
Thanks. All right. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Have
Bye.
a good night.
you
You
too.
too.